Sari de Lamotte, you're an expert in nonverbal intelligence. Can you tell us what that is and why it's important?
Well, I think a lot of people would define that differently. So we are definitely branding ourselves as the non-body language experts. We really believe that a lot of the body language stuff out there isn't helpful or useful. For example, if you Google body language or nonverbal communication, the first thing that comes up is how to tell if people are lying. And supposedly you're supposed to watch for blinking eyes and sweating. And I just think that's missing the entire point of communication. So our definition of nonverbal intelligence is the ability to be aware both of your nonverbal communication and other people's nonverbal communication. And then adaptable so that you know what you're seeing and how to change your communication to make sure that good communication is happening, all while remaining authentic. Because I think a lot of the body language tricks out there are very inauthentic and borderline manipulative. So that's how we would define nonverbal intelligence, the ability to be aware, adaptable, and authentic.
You write that how you use your voice affects how receptive people are to your message. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so this afternoon when I go into the seminar that I'll be presenting, we're going to talk about two basic voice patterns that you'll hear in a variety of situations. And one voice pattern is called the authoritative voice pattern. So that's when your voice curls down at the ends of statements, and I liken that to James Bond. So Bond, James Bond. And you'll hear that voice pattern, the higher levels of any organization you go, you'll hear that voice pattern more and more. Then we also have the approachable voice pattern, which is a little bit more rhythmic and it curls up at the ends of statements. And you'll tend to hear that voice pattern in different situations. And what we always say is that neither one is good or bad. It's that there's timing. And that's a lot of communication is timing. You know, I was watching Sir Ken Robinson yesterday, and man, his timing is just impeccable in terms of comedy, but the same thing goes for communication. So when you're trying to communicate the issue, you want to communicate with an authoritative voice pattern. And likewise, if you hear the authoritative voice pattern, you want to match by also going authoritative. But if you hear the approachable voice pattern, you want to also use your approachable voice pattern. That means that the person's more interested in relationship in that moment. And we somehow get those mixed. I remember when Kevin and I, my husband and I, are looking for a TV, and I walk in and I'm all issue. This is the TV that we want. We found it online. Do you have it? You know, and the salesperson's doing what all salespeople do, which is friendly. And they're like, oh, that's great. Where are you going to put it? And I'm just clearly communicating, get to the issue with my voice pattern, along with other nonverbals. But the salesperson isn't picking it up. They're working off of a formula, which is salespeople are always approachable. And so permission in our work, or receptivity is how what we talk about is in terms of permission, went down. And it's not that he was being friendly or not friendly, it's that he wasn't reading what I needed in the moment. My voice pattern was telling him, let's get to the issue first. Then we can have some relationship once that need gets met. And so voice pattern is a great way to cue in into what people are needing in the moment, because they often don't tell us verbally, they'll tell us non-verbally.
What advice can you give me if I really want to engage an audience? What should I do?
Well, first of all, you should show up as your real self. I mean, I think that's one of the things. I mean, even watching some of the presentations yesterday, and this is nothing personal, but so much of presentations is read or, you know, done. And I think going back to Sir Ken, who's a personal hero of mine, there's no notes. He just comes out and he's just with his audience. And I think that's really good presenting. You know, I was working with someone once, and he sat down and he said, I just hate presentations because I just feel like I can't be myself. And I said, being yourself is the only thing that's going to make this a good presentation. Otherwise, it's going to be one of those ones where we're all looking at our watches going, when is this over? So really just, I think, having a normal, I always call it speechy voice. When someone's talking, I go, why are you using that voice? They go, what voice? I said, speechy voice. It's like, now I am giving a presentation to you. And it's just not... You know, it's not you. So the first thing I do is go and I find the person's style and I go, okay, let's bring that out with good presentation skills. Don't get me wrong. But I think the biggest thing for presenters, and this is true probably for your audience because they speak to large groups, is the number one thing I would say is to take up space. And what I mean by that is most people come in and they're not aware. We talk about presence a lot in our work, and presence really is 4 areas, you know, that you're present in your mind, you know, you're actually here, that you're aware in your body, but you're also aware of space and others. And most people are never aware of space. So when they communicate, they're really communicating in this bubble. And so I remember I was speaking for a group of 1,100 people, and before I started, I had to take in the whole room. and really just kind of invite that space to be with me during my presentation. I liken it to kind of putting out a nonverbal picnic blanket and going, okay, let's all gather here. But a lot of times, and you'll be able to see this now, I've mentioned it to you, you'll watch a presenter and you can just tell that they're presenting right here. And their voice is going out to the audience, but they're only kind of aware of their own space. They haven't quite invited everybody in. And again, going back to Sir Ken, just because I saw him yesterday, it's on my mind. He was the whole space. He was just in that whole huge auditorium. He just kind of filled the whole thing. And it's kind of a nebulous concept, but I think it's being aware of the space. People are aware of how much you're aware of your space. We can pick up on that.
So how do you coach people past stage fright when they present to large audiences?
I think stage fright is a symptom, again, as we communicate who we are, of a bigger problem. So it's not this one thing. It's what's the fear? What's the story? What's the story you're telling yourself? Are you afraid you're going to fall? Are you afraid you're going to, whatever it is, let's fix that. So if it's you're afraid you lose your memory, then and I never have people memorize presentations, I always have them memorize structure and then just wing it when they're there. So we always go to that, but we talk a lot about breathing, as I mentioned before, a lot about breathing and how that brings you into the present moment, helps you access your content. I mean, that's the one thing with lawyers is that they're all up here. It's all content. They're training, they prep, and then they get into voir dire, for example, and they freeze. And I said, that's when you need to breathe and access all your preparation and your content in the moment, right? So that breathing is what brings it into your body so that you can actually do it now that you've prepped for 6 months or however long it's been.
Since we're at the nation's largest gathering of state lawmakers, do you have any general observations about how lawmakers communicate non-verbally? What makes them credible versus not credible, and charismatic versus not charismatic?
Charisma is something that is bandied around a lot, isn't it? And in our seminars, we used to ask, what's charisma? And people will turn around and they go, It's like we know it when we see it, but it's very hard to define. And so what we've come to in our work is that instead of charisma, which I think is this kind of, I can't say no to you, magical thing, I said, I'm not sure that that's something that I want to have. We talk about it in terms of developing a leadership presence versus charisma. And what that really is that you're balanced. So going back to that authoritative and approachable, my dad had a stroke in 2010, and when we were sitting at his bedside, there's not a lot to do, so we started just picking the nurses that we liked the most, because you never see the doctors. And what we found was the best nurses were a blend of their, what we say, position and person, or they're authoritative and they're approachable, meaning when your loved one is lying in a bed, helpless, you definitely want someone who knows what they're doing. So that's the approachable, and that's how that gets communicated non-verbally. Authoritative. That's how that gets communicated. But you also want someone who cares. So we had the nurses that came in and were all business, and we had the nurses that came in and were all jokey, but when you had that combination, I'm saying that's charisma, or that's that leadership presence. And that's what I think we're looking for in today's politicians or leaders in the world, is that we want to, we define leadership at Forte as 2 ingredients. You have to be going somewhere, and you have to have followers. That's it. That's leadership. Now, you can be a good leader or a bad leader, but those two, though, you have to have those two. Would you not agree? If you're not going anywhere, then there's no reason to follow you. And if you're going somewhere and no one's following you, then you're not a leader. So if you have those 2 things, that's leadership. But now when you have your following, they want to know that A, you can get to where you're going. That's the authoritative piece. And B, that you care that they come along, that it's not just all for you. And so that's why we keep coming back to those 2 halves, is that it's not authoritative good, approachable bad, or vice versa. It's when you can incorporate both of those things and communicate to your constituents or to your jurors or to your employees that you both are competent, that's the authoritative piece, but you are a real person and you care, that's the approachable piece. That's when charisma happens. That's when we look at someone and go, oh, he's so good and he's so nice, or she's so good and she's so nice. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.